I haven't figured out where I'm going to stand. I don't want to hide behind the podium, but I have to advance my slides. Good evening. I'm Hannah. I'm really excited to be with you tonight. Thanks for deciding to come and spend an hour with me, listening to me talk about my work. I'm a writer and an artist primarily, and that work over the last 10 years has really evolved into looking at environmental justice with a particular focus on water. But I love that this is an interdisciplinary group because I know you hear from scientists and policymakers, and I'm not that kind of expert. I am definitely an artist, but I get to work with a lot of really smart engineers and scientists and policymakers and community organizers that have informed my work. As Alfie mentioned, this is my new book, The Pool is Closed, Segregation, Summertime, and the Search for a Place to Swim. I've only written 2 books. The first one was Flight Path, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how these books came to be. Each one has taken like 6 or 7 years to write. It's just a long process. I'll talk a little bit about that and how kind of one thing leads to another. I don't usually start out with a plan. But I get curious about a topic, and once I start researching it and talking to people, things definitely evolve. And what I've learned is like I make this work, I put it out into the world, and then other people tell me what it is. So I didn't know I was doing environmental ethics work until Lauren reached out to me. But I also sometimes hear from people who teach like human geography or all these different academic kind of topics that I did not study. I studied creative writing. But I want to go through these slides. I have a bunch of images to show you, and then I'd love to talk to you about what's most interesting to you, and then we can hang out and sign books. But thanks for being here. So the kind of writing I do is creative nonfiction, and it's all personal to me. And if I could say what my influence is, it's probably sitting in church and listening to sermons and thinking about how a pastor weaves together personal anecdotes with scripture and helps think about life in the future. So I'm not like doing particularly religious work, but that is sort of the format that I most identify with is sermon. We're starting off with this slide because for me, these pictures were kind of the beginning of some of my first serious work as a writer. These are photographs. This is me. I'm like 19, sometime in the 80s. I'm like 2 years old. This is my family. These are photos of my mom when she was pregnant with me. And these are some of the only photos that I have of our family home in a city called Mountain View. Anybody ever heard of Mountain View? If you read my book, Flight Path, a lot of it starts with like trying to answer that question, what is Mountain View? It's a place where my parents were married when they were young, and they found a cheap rental, beautiful house. And I started this project of trying to understand what happened to that house. So this is the area near the airport that I was trying to find where this house was. Mountain View is a little town near the Atlanta airport on the east side of the airport. And the entire town was wiped out. Not really for runways, but because it was too close to the airport. And the FAA had a buyout program for houses that were impacted by noise. So this is me and some friends. Actually, this is kind of old. I feel like this might be like 2010, riding our bikes around in these ghost towns near the Atlanta airport. I found this really fascinating and compelling, and I was like, what happened here? I grew up in this near the airport, but I did not understand, what happened. What happened to all the houses, the businesses, the churches, schools that were displaced and erased as the airport grew. So when you grow up in Clayton County or South Fulton County, when I did in the 80s and early 90s, you're seeing this airport grow. And everybody's talking about like it's the greatest thing in the world, but you're also kind of like confronted with really a weird landscape that nobody can explain. So I started doing all this historical research. I'm not a trained historian, but luckily, if you have a library card, you can, you're really persistent and stubborn, you can start digging up images like this. This is the Atlanta airport in the 60s when it was expanding. And these are houses. These are houses in College Park that are now underneath the terminals. And you can see other pockets of houses. That's Mountain View on the east side of the airport. And all of, and we're talking not just my family home, but hundreds and hundreds of homes in Riverdale, Hapeville, College Park, Forest Park, were really erased for the growth of the world's busiest airport. This is just an overlay of a 1967 topographical map and the current, what is that? Wolfgang Puck's Express, Oh, that's A gates and B gates. So you can kind of see the overlay of those were houses and neighborhoods. So in my work as a creative writer, when I was doing this research, I was really taking a lot of notes, not just on the research, but how it felt to do the research. And when I finally was able to overlay these images, it felt really violent. It felt very upsetting to find out that all these places had been wiped off the map with no explanation. So basically, a lot of that research led to the book that is really a memoir called Flight Path. And it's my story, but it's also the story of the south side of Atlanta during that era. And I talked to lots of other families and businesses and found cemeteries and, in the process of digging what did we sacrifice to create this massive infrastructure that we all rely on. So we try to kind of approach the complexity of the airport as, it's this amazing, machine that I use with pleasure very often. It came at a cost, and I'm trying to explore that cost and how, generations later, people reflect on what was lost. So in all that digging, guess what else I found under the airport? I didn't know, and a lot of people don't know, that the headwaters of the Flint River are piped underneath the airport. And I actually drew that blue line so you can see it a little more clearly. But when I say headwaters, I'm talking about a series of small creeks that are flowing around East Point and College Park. And they form underneath the airport to create the Flint River. Almost all the blue line that you see there in the 50s is now under runways. So all of that is hidden away. This is kind of what it looks like. This is actually a portion of Sullivan Creek that was channelized during the construction of the 5th runway, which I remember very well when the 5th runway was constructed. This is a massive infrastructure project to build a runway like the 5th runway that actually, if you're familiar, it spans I-285. It also required putting a large portion of Sullivan Creek underground. And then this is a picture from the 70s that I got from a contact at Delta. This is the Flint River going into an 18-foot tall culvert near College Park. So you can actually drive by Delta's headquarters today and see the Flint River, where it's just a creek. It's not a lot of water, but that's that 18-foot culvert there at as it leads underneath the runways. So once I started sort of studying the Flint River and its headwaters, I just got really hooked. I just got bit by this bug that was so fascinating to me, that there's Georgia's second longest river is the Flint River. The longest is, Chattahoochee. Second longest is the Flint. They join at the Florida state line to form the Apalachicola River. And it's a really important river basin, Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint. That's the ACF, which you may know has had us in litigation with the state of Florida and Alabama for decades. So this is a really important river. All rivers are sacred, but this happens to be my river. This is the one, my watershed I grew up in and still live in today. I live in East Point. And it's just wild to me that it's these fragile headwaters are piped underneath the world's busiest airport and have virtually been erased from the map. You have to go back to the 50s and 60s to actually find it on the map. So not by myself, but with some colleagues at American Rivers, the Conservation Fund, and the Atlanta Regional Commission, I started this whole campaign, and I got paid to do this, like a part-time job, to create this campaign called Finding the Flint. And I got access to all these areas. This is inside the airport. This is what it looks like just south of I-285, where the Flint is actually flowing freely. It's no longer in that culvert, but it's kind of winding through this huge airport-owned property. So my joke with this slide is that there are absolutely, definitely beavers and bobcats inside the airport. I've seen traces of all kinds of critters. And it is amazing to think that from here on the north side of the airport to here on the south side of the airport, how full of life the river is. Now, why is that amazing? I'm not, I was a Girl Scout. I like the outdoors, but I find it exciting because of what this symbolizes. This is like a symbol of resilience, of how like Mother Nature always wins. You know, we repress this river in every possible way, you know, into concrete channels and underneath runways. And I've seen evidence of fuel spills at this location. I've seen terrible dumping, and yet you can't keep a good river down. You know, it just, it continues to flow. All of this, what you're seeing, you know, this river it's from natural groundwater springs. And when it rains, this area floods. But this is a living river that, despite everything that we've done to it over the last century, is still really valuable and serves as the drinking water supply for lots of South Metro. If you're from Clayton, Coweta, Fayette County, you're drinking from the Flint, and all the way down through all the important agriculture of Southwest Georgia depends on the Flint. This is what it looks like. The first place you can kind of pull over in your car on Forest Parkway. This is what it looks like. It's quite beautiful. That property, that is airport property. Don't walk there. You'll get in big trouble. But then, you know, the flip side, I have lots of really pretty pictures of the Flint to try to convince people it's a worthy resource. It's worth rescuing. It's worth documenting. It's worth preserving. So I have lots of pretty pictures, and then I have lots of really sad river pictures. You know, I spent about 5 or 6 years getting residents and elected officials and anybody who would listen, funders, advocates out to find the Flint. That was my job for several years, and I loved it. So here's sad river pictures. I include this one because growing up in Clayton County, this was all I knew about the Flint River. And if you grew up in Metro Atlanta, you probably have a similar Camp Creek Parkway or Hudson Bridge Parkway. You have some like reference to a river or creek. You see a street that's got ferry in it or bridge in it, but like, have you actually been able to get to the water? It's hard. And that's kind of what this whole project is about, is like, how do we sort of reconnect to these rivers that were at the foundation of, you know, Muskogee Creek settlements there. The first white settlements there had grist mills on these rivers, and all of Atlanta grew up because of the water resources, and now you can't see them or touch them or enjoy them. So this is all I knew about the Flint. I certainly had never kayaked in it or fished in it or swam in it. You wouldn't want to, let me tell you. This is what it looks like. South of the airport, it's just, I mean, what do you see? Y'all, you can read the health of this creek. Massive erosion. I don't know what's up with that color. It's just not good. This is just south of some quarries. So there's a lot of nasty runoff. So, you know, I'm talking about the Flint, but more and more as I started to understand, hang out with scientists who explain things to me, I learned how to read a creek. And honestly, almost every creek inside the perimeter of Atlanta suffers from the same symptoms. We call it an urban stream syndrome. When you see erosion and you see, street runoff, it's just extra bad at the airport because of the scale of the impervious surface of the airport. You know, 4,700 acres of pavement, and then the extra contaminants like de-icing fluid and jet fuel, which does make its way into our river. And then the flip side of that is, you know, this is flooding at Upper Riverdale Road. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the area, but Southern Regional Medical Center is like the only ER on the south side. And when it rains, like this was the remnants of a hurricane, where, you know, access to the hospital gets cut off. So this is where you see like all these like negative environmental impacts kind of compounding. You've got stormwater runoff, uncontrolled flooding, lots of contamination, cutting off access to an ER to some of the most vulnerable communities in Metro Atlanta. All right, so I spent a lot of time doing this kind of thing. This is like the mayor of College Park and some advocates, and I've taken hundreds of people on tours to find the Flint, and it's really fun. It's like a scavenger hunt. You start with these old maps, and you're like, well, here's where it says the spring is. Let's go see if we can find water. And we hunt around, we look down storm drains, and, you know, based on these old maps and some, you know, most of the topography has not changed. You can still find where the water is, and it's really fun. I have to say, I remember what I said about paying attention to your feelings? This is a theme in my work. Like, I'm a nerd, I care about the history, I care about the science, but I also get really excited when people look down a storm drain and they see flowing water and they jump up and they're like, I found it, you know, oh my God. You see this sense of discovery and joy, and I I would say that all of you, if you end up in careers in environmental work, you got to tap into that joy, the play, the discovery, or you'll get burnout because it's hard work. So just, little wins, just naming it. We got the city of East Point to put up a sign, next to this little ditch. I mean, it's like a ditch on the side of Willingham Drive in East Point, and it's kind of lost its name. Did I see Spirited Away when the dragon remembers his name, Kohaku? Yeah, anyways. I was like, yes, this is it. So we're just calling it a river. I don't know, you could call it a drainage ditch, call it a creek. You could call it a lot of things. I call it the Flint River because technically this is where it begins. So that's what writers do. We name things. We use our words to try to wield what power we have. But I would say it is a powerful thing that now everybody who drives down this little industrial corridor in East Point is like, where's the river? Because this little creek, believe it or not, is full of, I did find a snapping turtle that was like this big in there. And there's got to be a food supply. If the turtle is that big. I've seen it more than once too. So yeah, and then there's always like a hawk, and it's urban wildlife. It's full of possums and snakes and raccoons and who knows. But if there's all these bigger invertebrates, you better believe there's a food supply. Just another look at me taking people under a bridge. It's a really fun job. And then a really joyful part of it was getting people a little further downstream where you can swim in it. Anybody from Upson County know about Squirrel Bluff Park? This is about 50 miles south of the airport. So hour-and-a-half drive south of the airport, where the Flint River is gorgeous. And I think a lot of people from Atlanta think you go to North Georgia to get into a beautiful river. But Middle Georgia, where the Flint is flowing freely, this is a spot where my friend Catherine's fly fishing for shoal bass there. I brought I think there's a couple of city council members from College Park in the river with me. But this is a spot on the river where you can see, in the same little area, you can see mountain laurel and Spanish moss. That's these two ecoregions kind of coming together at the fall line. It's really spectacular. If you get a chance, go in the springtime when the shoal lilies are blooming. These spider shoal lilies are really lovely. Part of my job was getting people from the headwaters, from the airport, as many folks from Georgia Power and Delta and Hartsfield-Jackson and elected officials in East Point and Forest Park, as many as I could to get into canoes. We got in canoes and we went down. We went to the Flint River. Just a little side note I will mention, took a lot of people on paddling trips. I'm not like the world's most confident paddler, but the river, it takes you. You don't have to work at it. It's not whitewater. It's just like really calm. It's really fun. And there's a couple of places where you go over some rapids, but it's an easy float. We would spend the day floating, and then we'd have lunch, and then we would drive back to Atlanta. And more than once, the person in my canoe, I'd be in the back sort of doing the piloting of the canoe. More than once, we'd finish the trip, and the person in my canoe would say, "Oh, that was great. I don't know how to swim." I'm going to get more of that in a minute. Because a lot of what I'm talking about to you right now is about access to water. So no surprise that folks that I might bring with me from College Park and East Point, from communities, urban communities that don't have access to a river at all, and literally don't have access to swimming pools, would tell me later on, after they sign the waiver, after we finish the trip, "By the way, I don't know how to swim." That really stressed me out. But it's pretty common, and it was a learning experience for me. Okay, so back to the power of naming. This is that spot on Forest Parkway where you can pull over and see the river and see airplanes landing on top of it. It took a couple years, but I finally got Clayton County DOT to put up some signs that say Flint River. And you'd better believe I was there taking photos and cheering, and they were like, "She's crazy." But like, how long has it been since anybody knew this was a river? And within like a month of these signs going up, I was taking a group underneath the bridge to see the headwaters, and I found a fruit offering down there that someone had tossed off the bridge. At first I thought it was litter, but then I realized it was sliced oranges, and I can't remember what else, but this is common around Atlanta. I find on creeks and rivers, you'll find offerings to the goddess Oshun. And practitioners of the Yoruba religion believe that the goddess Oshun is the freshwater goddess of the river, and she's the goddess of love and fertility. And you leave these fruit offerings to show gratitude and respect to the goddess. So literally putting up a sign was the first time that I actually found those offerings to the goddess. And it really, again, how does that make me feel? It makes me feel like we're clawing back some of what we lost culturally. And that people are, I mean, like I find it to be spiritual. When I find flowing water, I find it to be literally like my blood pressure goes down as I get closer to the water. And it was just really rewarding to see that somebody else in their own way felt the same. So now I'm going to jump to another project that I started in the process of doing Finding the Flint. Of course, I was getting really interested in the naming of our creeks and rivers and how we kind of lost that over time and how few people even know the name of their local creek. Anybody know what watershed we're in now? I mean, I know the river. We might be just in the, I know, but there's some creek near. I should have looked this up. Usually I try to look this up, but Tanyard? Thank you. That's cool to know. I mean, little kids, my kids, when they're like second grade, they had to learn their watershed address. And they had to learn, okay, I'm in the Utoy Creek watershed, which flows to the Chattahoochee River, which flows to the Gulf of Mexico. It's a way of just like a basic literacy when it comes to the landscape. And that's really missing in Atlanta. And I feel like Atlanta, sorry to talk about Atlanta so much, but this is where I've been doing a lot of my work. Atlanta is rich with creeks. I assume Athens is rich with creeks. The Southeast is just water rich. We have creeks everywhere, rivers everywhere. The state of Georgia has dozens of river basins, and that is not normal. Most states have like 2 or 3, and we have dozens of major river basins. That's why we have such remarkable biodiversity, really, in the Southeast. So with my friend Sarah Lawrence, who's a graphic designer, we decided we would make logos for all the creeks and start this thing called Atlanta Creek League. Because also, as a writer, I love these names. These words are awesome. Doolittle Creek is cool. Tanyard, we have a Tanyard Creek. That's cool. And this is just a few of them. We ended up doing about, I think we have like 25 or 30 urban creeks. Snapfinger is now, we've done that one. I haven't updated it. But basically made t-shirts for creeks so that people could, you can go to atlantacreekleague.com and you can put in your address and it'll tell you what your local creek is, show you where your watershed is, and you can buy t-shirts and connect with other people in your watershed. So this is the kind of art project that I just like dream about a little bit and try to get some friends to help me with. It's a social practice. I can't do all of these things, but this is really fun, and it's kind of taken off in that some local organizations like the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance will order whole boxes of Proctor Creek shirts when they have a cleanup. And it's kind of free. I mean, we just made these designs thinking like, this will be cool. People will remember the name of their creek, and I don't care about sports, but I'll root for a creek team. So this is a thing I did. And, started organizing around cleanups and like giving out shirts and got some sponsors. So just a fun way to reconnect people with their creeks. That's my creek, Utoy. This research led me into thinking a lot about Atlanta's lost springs and lost creeks that are downtown and how we built on top of them. And so I started this whole research project and I called it Department of Urban Springs. And this is another project I hardly have time to do. I just keep coming up with these new projects. But so I started a walking tour of downtown Atlanta of where the lost springs are. This is sort of an X-ray of the city. And you can access this data. It's USGS Stream Stats. You can see all of these blue lines are downtown Atlanta. You will not see water flowing unless you come on my tour. And then we will find some places where you can listen to a storm drain and you can hear the water flowing. And I literally take people, I dress up like a ranger because I'm the government Department of Urban Springs. It doesn't really exist. This is actually a group from UGA. Anybody see themselves in this picture? Yeah, so I take people down in the Gulch. We're at the spot downtown where the mile marker, the original mile marker is, and that's where Entrenchment Creek, it's right here, that red dot is Entrenchment Creek. So I'm just trying to I get really excited about this stuff. I just want to jump up and down and say, hey, did you know there's a spring here? Did you know there used to be a whole amusement park and a swimming pool? And I didn't care about history when I was a kid in history class, but now it makes so much sense to me. It explains so much in the landscape that I'm wondering about. All kinds of issues are explained when you start understanding the water that's flowing underground and its impact on development. So Department of Urban Springs, Atlanta Creek League, All of this kind of leads to where I'm going to talk about the research in this book about swimming pools. And this talk is like called Urban Swimming Holes and the Politics of Public Space. So that's a long introduction to get you. So like how my mind works, how I started really thinking about swimming pools in public space. This is like the plat map, the oldest plat map I could find of my neighborhood in East Point. And I went to the Atlanta History Center, and you can get these big books and dig up these like original subdivision plat maps. So, like stole the land from the Muskogee, put in some railroad tracks, and developers came and said, we're going to put a neighborhood here. This is my neighborhood. And this is what this little line is. It just looks like a scratch on the map. But that's, you see what it's called? Branch. That's an old school name for creek. Or, I like, there's regional names for little waterways. I grew up calling them creeks. But different places all over the U.S. call them different things. And in 1840s or whenever this was drawn, 1850s, would have been, sorry, after the Civil War. This was a branch that didn't have a name, but this very site ultimately became this swimming pool. So they dammed up that branch, which you see it's called the Cold Springs Q Club. That's a barbecue club. And it was a site of, big parties for 100 years or something, I don't know. And then eventually in the 30s, city of East Point, we're talking about city of East Point. East Point's on the southwest Atlanta. They got a grant from the federal government to build this swimming pool. So this swimming pool is like walking distance from my house, or at least it was. It's not there anymore. I love to think that this was in my neighborhood, that it was, free to the public, and that it was a natural swimming hole. All the oldest swimming pools in America were basically, natural swimming holes. This was a concrete pool, but it was spring fed, and they would drain it. They'd fill it and drain it over and over again. There wasn't any chlorine or chemicals or filtration, so it's a pretty rudimentary swimming hole. I love this, but if you look closely at the picture, it's all white people. This would have been segregated for the white residents of East Point only. From the time it was built in the early 30s, like 1932, until they had to tear it down and rebuild it in the 50s, and then for several years after that, up until 1964. This was an amazing public amenity that was only available to half the residents. So this is in my neighborhood. Here's another one in Atlanta. This is Grant Park. This is called Lake Abana, another spring-fed. It would have been a tributary of Entrenchment Creek that flows through Grant Park in Atlanta. It's a massive, I think it was like a 30 or 40 acre lake, swimming lake. Guess what's there now? Zoo Atlanta. They filled this in 1964, and rather than comply with court order desegregation. So they built the Atlanta Zoo in this spot. Only white people ever swam here. I mean, legally. There might have been some folks who snuck in. And then this is Washington Park Pool in Southwest Atlanta, which was the first, and for a long time, the only public swimming pool in Atlanta for African-American residents. Also, they call this a bathtub pool. So there's a creek. In this case, I don't know, it was probably some tributary of Utoy Creek or Sandy Creek that was dammed as a swimming hole, a natural swimming hole for the residents, the Black residents of Southwest Atlanta. What's there now is a swimming pool, but it's a big indoor natatorium. It's nothing like this. And I've been there to take my kids to swimming lessons. So at least it's still a place where people swim, but I have to say, big indoor swimming pools are just not as exciting. It's a totally different vibe. Okay, so this is my kids a few years ago. They're now much bigger, but this is East Point where that pool used to be that I showed you. The city filled it in completely. They have on their swimsuits. I'm taking them to a swim lesson. I really kind of blended together my own research and my mom duties because they're in this picture, they're like 4 and 6 years old. And 4 and 6-year-old little kids think they know how to swim, but they do not. And it's very dangerous. And CDC has data to back up drowning incidents really peak at this age, especially for young boys, because they get really bold and they think they can fling themselves into water and they sink. They do not know what they're doing. So I see my kids doing this and it's freaking me out. I'm like, I've got to get lessons. How do I? And honestly, parenthood is everything is like this. School, healthcare, supporting them is a constant scramble of like, how do I do this? Because you don't get a lot of public support on these things. So I'm on my way to take them to a swimming lesson at a lady's house in College Park, and we stopped to take a picture where the pool used to be, where they in other generations, kids got to learn to swim there. And I'm asking myself, why don't we have a pool? City of East Point has 38,000 people, and there's no public swimming pools in East Point. So the question is like, what happened? I see these pictures. There used to be pools. Why don't we have them anymore? Why? I'm hearing. I asked this question at the East Point Historical Society. I get one answer. I ask our elected officials. I get another answer. But deep down, I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's racism. I'm pretty sure that's probably what's happened here is that we lost our pools. So that kind of inspired the research for this book. It's really like, I need a real answer to why we don't have pools anymore. And it is complicated, but my gut was not incorrect. City of East Point used to have pools, used to have two pools, the white pool and the black pool. That first pool in the 30s eventually had to be completely rebuilt because by the 50s, we had chlorine and we had filtration and we had better technology than the giant spring-fed bathtub. So the city shut down that pool. It was no longer up to code. And they built a completely new pool on the same site. And that's what you see here. And at the same time, they built a mini version in the Black community. It's a community called East Washington. It was the segregated part of East Point. So the pools were like actual matches of each other, except the white pool was 4 times bigger. I mean, that communicates a hierarchy just in those decisions, that they funded both of these pools at the same time, but at wildly different scales. Both were really successful. I did all this research. I talked to people who swam in the pools. I dug up some images. These are some pictures of the Spring Avenue pool, which is the white pool in East Point, on opening day in 1933 and on opening day in 1954. And what do these pictures have in common? Sexy women, yes, bathing beauties. I didn't bring a copy, but there is a great book called Contested Waters by Jeff Wiltsey, and it is a social history of swimming in America. And he really talks about the story of swimming in, not the South, he was focused on big cities in the Northeast. Some of the biggest battles over public swimming pools happened in like St. Louis and Pittsburgh and New York. And he has a whole chapter about how shrinking swimsuits, the effect it had on racial segregation. Because the sexier women's swimsuits got, the more intensely the white community wanted to keep Black eyes off of white women. So even though they didn't mind putting it in the newspaper and bringing in bathing beauties for opening day, this is part of why swimming pools became that last battleground over racial integration. We managed to integrate public transportation and libraries and schools, but this was where people drew the line. This was too intimate. And personally, this is one of my favorite things about public pools is like, you're hanging out with total strangers, like your underwear. And it's really, people are like taking a nap, they're relaxing, they're sunning, they're playing, they're flirting. It's just a really intimate public space. Again, I keep talking about how places make me feel. And this is why outdoor public pools are so much more exciting than big indoor pools. Indoor pools, people are like exercising, training and doing therapy or taking lessons. But outdoor pools, people are just relaxing, having fun, chatting with their neighbors, flirting with cute girls. It's a really different vibe. And this was new in America. When the federal government, the WPA, funded small public pools in like towns all over America, some of them are massive public pools, like in New York City. It really created a culture of hanging out with your neighbors barely dressed. This was very modern, very exciting. And it's important to keep this in mind when you think about why America, not just East Point, not just Atlanta, but all of America, really failed to integrate these public spaces. This is a photo of the Piedmont Park pool on like opening day in June of 1964 when the pools were legally desegregated. It's not exactly a portrait of integration, but these very brave young men were the first Black people to swim in the Piedmont Park pool. And you can look at these photos on Atlanta Journal-Constitution's archives, and some of the photos, like you see these guys heading towards the pool, and again, so vulnerable. You know, they're just barely dressed, they have a towel, they look completely vulnerable, and they're surrounded by media. You see, those are all media up in the stands. And it's a big moment for Atlanta where they peacefully integrated the public pools. So this happened peacefully in Atlanta, but what happened immediately after is not integration. It was more like a wholesale transfer of these spaces from white spaces to black spaces. White people stopped going to the public pools in general. Some out of just fear, because around the nation there were riots at public pools in the 40s in St. Louis. Terrible violence at these sites. So some people just wanted to avoid the drama. Some people were racist and didn't want to share space or water with people who didn't look like them. But the general outcome was the gradual defunding of these public amenities. So in the summer of 2018, when I'm trying to get my kids to learn how to swim, we made it our mission to go to every public pool we could get to in the one summer. And we went to like 19 public pools in Atlanta and many in the suburbs all around. And I just tried to observe and report on what I saw there. We went to lots of amazing pools. We saw a lot of segregation. This is Garden Hills Pool on the north side of Atlanta, largely white crowd. And which one is that? Mosley Park in Atlanta, which was, we're the only white people. So we still see the remains of segregation in the pools. It's nice that these pools still exist, but there's a wide disparity in access. And this was a weird one that I didn't expect. This is like a weird form of segregation. We went to some pools and we were the only people there. Beautiful day, Saturday, perfect weather, nobody in the pool. This is Pittman Park Pool in, it's like south side downtown. This is Thomasville Heights on the east side. These are, I would say, these communities are like low-income communities, mostly African-American residents. So I kind of figured we'd be the only white people. But honestly, once the kids start playing, it's very welcoming. They have a really good time. But I did not know how to feel about being the only people in the pool. And I had to finally ask a lifeguard, where is everybody? She said, is anybody going to guess what I'm going to tell you? She said, this is pay swim. Nobody comes here at pay swim. Come at free swim, this pool will be full, it'll be crowded, it'll be rowdy, it'll be really fun. But at pay swim, nobody's coming. So we went during pay swim because $4 a person was no big deal to us. But in that community, $4 was a deal breaker. They were going to wait till 4 o'clock when it was free swim. I had no idea that this is how the pools were operating, and it made me feel really icky. It made me feel like it was still segregated in a way because we could afford the $4 and the neighborhood kids could not. So I was like, these pools should be free all the time. You know, I was firing off emails like a Karen. Why can't these kids swim for free? Well, the city can barely afford to staff the facilities that they have. So that's part of the issue. It's just having enough lifeguards. So in the book, I don't just talk about the past and I don't talk about the present, but I also visit 2 communities that were trying to build pools. And because my question is not just like, why did we lose the pools, but why don't we still not have them? It's 2025. City of East Point still has no pool and no plans to make one. And yet there's lots of young people. There's lots of demand. So there's 2 kind of sagas in the book. One's on Tybee Island where they're trying to build a pool. As you can imagine, Tybee Island's on the coast. You can't swim, 6 months out of the year. And if you're learning to swim, the Atlantic Ocean is not the best bet. So residents in Tybee Island worked really hard to get a pool built. They were defeated, mostly for racist reasons. The actual residents of Tybee Island are largely white, and they did not want outsiders coming to the pool. They didn't want to pay for a facility that would serve visitors to Tybee Island. There's a lot more to the story. It's in here. A similar story played out in East Point. City of East Point proposed an aquatic center in 2018. I attended those meetings with a lot of excitement, and everybody there was opposed. And this was a different crowd. Mostly residents in East Point in this neighborhood were mostly African-American retirees, and they did not want this in their neighborhood. They said it'll bring crime, it'll bring traffic. We can't afford this. The city can't afford this. We can't insure this. What if someone drowns? Just fear and resistance. So I kind of was like left both of these feeling like people have sort of lost the idea of how awesome a pool is, how fun it is, what a joy it is, what a pleasure it is. It's just when you put it on a spreadsheet, and honestly, these are not the most exciting renderings. It looks like a LA Fitness or something. I get it. But I get more into that in the book about like how hard it is once you've lost this amenity to invest in it again. So with all this research, I created a couple public art installations. This is one in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. On UA's campus, they have this massive, it used to be a pool, and I marked out where the pool used to be. And for me, the kind of scandal was that this pool house was a museum, a history museum, that did not tell the history of the pool. And we're finally at a point where we need to talk about the legacy of Jim Crow because there's still no pool. So this was a one night, there's an installation I created about the history of swimming in Alabama and Tuscaloosa, and then a one night big pool party, basically, where we had music and stuff. And then last summer I did a similar installation in East Point. This is the site of the Black Pool, which is called the Randall Street Pool. We just created an installation where we showed where the pool used to be and put in, this is not like period correct, but a diving board and a little installation about the history of the pool. And that stayed up all summer. And then where the white pool was, I did a similar installation. And this is still up because it's at the East Point Historical Society and they wanted to tell this story. But in both cases, these are histories that the cities were not talking about. There's a lot of shame around, the legacy of what is essentially apartheid in our communities. And then the fact that there's still no pool. So even though the city was supportive of me doing that, it was a little awkward because residents start asking questions about, well, why can't we have a pool now? So this project was called Ghost Pools. A lot of the research from Ghost Pools ended up in the book. One cool thing about Ghost Pools is people came back who remembered swimming in those pools. And they told me a lot of stories that are pretty wild and that I included in the book. James Dyer was a lifeguard at the Randall Street Pool. And Jim Grayson's father was the director of Parks and Recreation for City of East Point. And when a white girl did a swimming instructing, like a Red Cross swim instruction in the Black Pool, it caused such a scandal that the KKK chased his family out of the city and his dad was fired. So I heard all these crazy stories about, that people finally were ready to talk about. And it was a kind of process of healing, I think. And this is, I think, my last slide, and then I want to answer your questions. This just happened like a couple months ago. I think it was last fall. Like I said, this is my neighborhood. This is the site of the big East Point swimming pool, the original municipal white pool. So I'd pass this all the time, and one day I saw the city digging on that site, and I saw water coming out. And my first thought was like, ooh, they hit the spring. I want to go see the spring. And so I pulled over later that night to see if I could see the spring. It wasn't the spring. It was like a water main was broken down there and they had to dig to fix that pipe that you see. But look what I could see underground. Can you see that that's like blue concrete? It's the remains of the pool. Like I was right here. This is where they were digging. And that just blew my mind because as many black and white photos as I've seen of that pool, I'd never seen it in color. And it was like right there. So what a metaphor. I'm sorry, I'm like such an English major, but I'm like, this is just like, it's just buried. It's just right there. This part of our history is just right within reach. And it burns me up that we're so close to this like flowing water underground that certainly has drawn people to that site for as long as human beings were ever in the area, they were drawn to that water, that fresh, cold spring water. And what are we missing as communities when we just bury these assets underground and then pollute them downstream when they finally come up out of the ground? So this is where I'm at. I'm still advocating for a pool in East Point. And the book gets into a lot more of the journey and some of my, other findings beyond Atlanta. We actually traveled all over the Southeast researching this book. But I have not been to the Athens pool. What can you guys tell me about the Athens swimming experience? Are there any swimming holes here? Any pools? I've heard about that. Is that a pool or a swimming hole? Are there any like natural swimming holes around here?
There used to be one, but it kind of like developed around it. You can't do access.
Yeah. So that was kind of like the thing that was driving me nuts. I would ask my parents, where did y'all learn to swim? And they would either say, at the public pool. And I'm like, we don't have that. Or at the swimming hole, I'm like, well, that's polluted. Or some lake, I'm like, well, that's been carved up into development, lakefront lots. You have no public access to these spaces. So even a generation ago, my parents grew up in the South and they had all these options. Where are my kids going to learn to swim? And I'm really privileged. I have the ability to drive them all over the place and like pay that $4. If I'm having trouble getting my kids in the water, that means that there's just like a whole generation of young people, particularly Black kids in South Atlanta, that just never learned to swim. And I met a lot of them. I met a lot of those families who either avoided water or just never had access. So it wasn't even in the options for them.
There was at least one Black pool that was closed in Newtown.
Right next to the dump and what's now the charm facility and the water treatment plant.
Yeah.
Next to the dump. Now there's a pattern. The East Point pool, I can't flip back to the pictures, but the African-American community that was segregated in East Point was downstream of some of the worst polluters, the big fertilizer factories and chemical companies. So even if there was a pool there, even to this day, I'd feel a little nervous about just the environmental issues in the area. Yeah.
Where do private swim clubs fit into the mix and all this?
Yeah. Well, good question. What's public? What's private? Is the YMCA a private swim club? I mean, a lot of people learn to swim at the YMCA. It's technically a membership club. I did find that in East Point, in 1959, some city fathers created the Lakeside Country Club, which was an all-white club with a great swimming pool. And a lot of people who abandoned the public pools joined private clubs. Those who could afford built backyard pools, but a lot of people joined private clubs. And chapter 1 of this book is our family is visiting a very mysterious club in Hapeville, which is a nearby community. And I'm looking around and I'm like, when was this built? What is this place? Is it public? Is it private? And it turns out it was totally built in the 60s in response to desegregation of the municipal pool in Hapeville. So it fits in, it created, just like all kinds of private clubs and private schools, it was a way to maintain segregation legally. And so, some of them still exist. And I had this moral question throughout the book, like, where are my kids going to learn to swim? Should we just join a club? Should we join the Y? Should we join one of these clubs? Should we build a pool in our bed? Like, the big question is like, okay, so integration was kind of a failure in my neighborhood. And yet I value, a diverse environment. I want my kids to have access to these things, but not at the expense of other people. So like, how do I find integrated spaces for them? And for me too, it's for me too. Any other questions?
Do you have a favorite Flint River memory?
Favorite Flint River memory? So I've just done a lot of hiking around the headwaters, and twice I found a $100 bill. Twice. I don't know why. I just honestly think somebody was like counting a stack of dollars. These are two totally separate times that I found a $100 bill. It's pretty cool. Yeah, that's treasures. No, paddling on the Flint is just really magical downstream, and like Squirrel Bluff, it's just really, on a hot summer day, just flipping your canoe on purpose because the cooler's got a lot of beer in it. It's just, I don't know. But like snooping around the headwaters and making discoveries, I found a lot of like animal remnants, like at the airport, snooping around the airport, found like an owl pellet or like bones, like deer bones, that kind of stuff. It's really exciting because you're at the airport and you do not expect to find coyote scat at the airport, but there it is. It's really fun.
How did you get permission to visit that part of the river that had been operated at the airport and the river had control?
Yeah. The woman who was in that shot was one of the directors of sustainability at the airport. So there's a lot of folks on like the public outreach and sustainability team who are, stewards of the Flint River and who partnered with us to do cleanups on site, but that is inside the security perimeter of the airport. And to get there, we had to like submit our IDs in advance and go with airport employees. I've been back there several times. And in fact, now they do an annual cleanup on Earth Day where it's airport employees. So airport employees are the ones who really need to see that beautiful spot. Because it's both beautiful and heartbreaking, because you see a lot of like airport crap in the river, like lots of earplugs and latex gloves and luggage tags, stuff that clearly blew off the runways. But it's a spot that I wish was open to the public, because it's really not, it's south of 285. It's really not endangering the airport operations. I think they keep it fenced off. They own it, but I think they keep it fenced off because the area floods really dramatically. I imagine it's a spot where flash floods could be really dangerous. Back in the back.
So the great, thank you so much. The pools you showed, I noticed in a couple of pools, like I was looking at the similarities. So you had some that had like these giant slides, and they were both kind of like black and white pools. And I'm wondering if you kind of found anything in your research of like how each culture kind of appropriated the space and started to make it their own.
How people, well, today when you go to a swimming pool, if you see a diving board, that tells you that this community has money for extra insurance. You know, like you do start to notice, I mean, some of the pools that are from the 70s are really bare bones. It's just like concrete, no frills. And those pools were funded through the federal government at a time when it was kind of a response to the racial uprisings in big cities, where the federal government said, we've got to get these kids off the street and cool them off in the summertime so they won't be rioting in the streets. So there were pools in Atlanta, Anderson Park, Thomasville Heights, that were literally funded with federal dollars meant to cool down urban youth. So you see these sort of trends in the design. Now, most pools you visit that have been built since like 2010, they have like the zero entry. They're built for people who may not know how to swim. In Atlanta, I saw a lot more like spray grounds and water fountain features, and the deepest pool, you know, at the Orange Park pool, which is 2017 or so, the deepest it gets is maybe like 3.5 feet. So kids can play in the water. They might learn some water confidence, but you cannot swim laps in there, and you probably can't drown. I mean, unless you're tiny. So pool design really reflects, the era when it was built. Like you never see this pool, you can see it's 10 feet deep. You'll never find a 10-foot deep pool anymore. If you ever get to a 10-foot deep pool, you know it's an old one, old school, where people were diving. Now diving is like, you never see that in public pools. It's too dangerous. Does that answer your question? I don't know, like some people, it's hard to take ownership of a public space except through some of the murals and artwork. City of Atlanta pools have some cool murals and artwork around them. But I don't know, I will say if you go to free swim in the summertime, there's a lot of people just hanging out, and it's their space, and they're smoking weed in the corner, and like they've been there all day, and they're playing music, and like it is a community space. Sure. Well, y'all have been sitting for a long time, and it is warm in here. I'm happy to hang out, answer more questions, sign books. I'm here to hang. So thank you so much for joining me and for your questions.